So in the last part we looked at the telescope, which would be sitting here. And today we're looking at the mount. And to extend the joke from last time, if you think that this whole thing is the mount, that's again not really completely accurate. Because the mount in principle is only this part here. And this below is the tripod. Why the mount is so important, what different types there are, what you have to look out for. Again, a deep dive in the different brands and models, and at the end some additional references. All that right after the trailer. So let's start with the basics. Why do we need a mount and what really is it? Why don't we just put our telescopes on a tripod, like a camera, and that's it? And the reason is, and you can see it here nicely in a simulation on my planetarium map, that the stars are moving. Obviously, it's more our Earth is moving. And because our Earth is moving, the sky is moving. So if we would just put our telescope on the tripod, after a minute or so, the picture in our telescope would have completely changed. And to make the issue worse, in astrophotography, we sometimes expose for 5 minutes, even for 10 minutes. Which means as soon as we're not exactly always looking at the same picture, the stars get blurry, we get star trails, or at least eggy stars, how we call it. And as we discussed last time, the higher the focal length of your telescope, the more accurate this thing has to be. And this is even more difficult because larger telescopes, more weight. So the longer your focal length, the heavier your telescope, the more the mount has to work. So in principle there exist two very different kind of mounts. And the first one we call alt-azimuth. And for example, all these celestron, next stars and so on, they have an alt-azimuth mount, which means the mount is flat on the tripod and the telescope can go up and down, right or left, which makes it super easy to navigate to a star, a galaxy, whatever you want to look at. You just go up and to the side until you're there. So that's perfect for visual astronomy, but it doesn't really work for astrophotography. So what's the issue? We can go up to the target and we follow it. No problem at all, right? Well, let's go back to our simulation. So when I now let it run again, look at the grid. The stars, they do not go parallel to the horizon, but they actually make a half circle. First they go higher and higher into the sky, and when they pass the meridian, they go down again, slowly, slowly. So if we follow them now with the alt-azimuth mount, the objects actually turn. We have them all the time in sight, but they turn. And when you make long exposures, that's an issue. You still get a blurry picture. So we actually need to turn our telescope in the same way the objects turn. And for that we need an equatorial mount, and that's an equatorial mount. So what's so special about it? As you can see, the axis is actually tilted. It's not horizontal, it's diagonal. And with that, when we follow an object around the sky, the telescope turns in the same way as the object does. So for astrophotography, an equatorial mount is an absolute must. So when we look a little bit closer at this mount, on top here, in this saddle, we put the telescope. And then we have one axis, which is this one here, and we have a second axis where it turns, which is in this direction. Here we have some counterweights, and depending on the mechanical type of mount that you have, you need more or less counterweights. These counterweights are there to offset the weight of the telescope. so that everything is nicely balanced. We need obviously something which actually steers this whole thing, which gives it the commands. And that's this little box down here. Below the mount, we have the tripod. And this here in the middle is an extension which you use when you have larger refractors. Point is, if you have a very long refractor on here, depending on how it moves, it might actually bump into the tripod. And so to ensure that this is not happening, you put such an extension on it, and so then there's more room until the tripod actually moves out. Now when we are at the tripod, just also for your awareness, the first shopping advice, you might think these tripods, they're neglectable. But the point is, for example, with this mount here, the tripod alone costs around $1,000. So the same as the scope. So all I'm saying is, with some mounts, the tripod is included. With some mounts, it isn't, it costs extra. To do a fair comparison between two offers, ensure that you compare always a whole package, mount and tripod. Now there's a few more things that are to mention that are specific to equatorial mounts. The first is you need to polar align them. What does that mean? When you have an alt-azimuth mount, you put it somewhere wherever you want, in whatever direction you want, and everything is fine. These mounts, they have to point exactly north. And this diagonal has to be exactly the diagonal which is correlating with your geographical location, if you're more north or more south. And this is all not just approximate, but it needs to be 100% correct. Now earlier, this was a big thing to polar align there. There were special devices and little polar alignment scopes with Polaris on it and so on. In our days, you have wonderful tools which we will come to, which will shoot 3 photos of the sky, and then it will tell you how you have actually to move your scope a little bit up, a little bit down, little bit west, a little bit east, until it's perfect. So software is really our big helper here. And when we're talking about that, we also need to align the scope in a sense that it knows where it is, where it points to. And also here in the earlier days, this was complicated. You had to do star alignments, you had to search for famous stars. Today we have plate solving, which means the telescope makes a photo of the sky, the computer analyzes it and sees where it is, and the story is done. So a lot of things got a lot easier thanks to computers. And then there's a last thing I want to mention. By most equatorial mounts, you have to do a meridian flip. So what is that? So you start in the evening to shoot. The star is rising up to the meridian and you shoot and shoot and shoot. And when the star comes to the meridian, you have to tell the telescope that it turns around. So when the telescope was up, it has to go down, and then upside down, it continues shooting. It's from a mechanical point of view not possible that it goes through the whole process without this meridian flip. Also, this is mostly done by software, but there are different issues with it, like that the cable entanglement, or that it gets out of balance, or whatever. Some people get nervous, some people stay up to follow the process of the meridian flip to ensure that nothing is happening. If you don't like the thought of a meridian flip, there's a solution to that. And that is this beautiful mount, which I have, which is an Avalon M0. And as far as I know, Avalon is the only brand who manufactures mounts which do not require a meridian flip. So with this mount, I can shoot through the whole night without having to worry about a meridian flip. And I think that's pretty cool. And I think that's actually a good point to talk about the different mechanical ways mounts work. Until about 2 years back, there was only one real way how these mounts were working. And that were worm gears. So what's that? I took the liberty of taking from my son's Lego Technic collection. This here actually, this part here is the worm gear. So if I put now a wheel here on top and I start turning that, then the wheel on top will turn very, very slowly. So I have a possibility to very precisely and very slowly turn around. And that's in principle what a worm gear drive is. What's the issue with it? One is you have quite some backlash. What means I have between this here and this here, I have some gaps. So when I actually move in the other direction, it takes a moment until this gap is filled and the wheel is actually driving again. And that's what we call backlash. The other problem with this worm gear mounts is that they needed quite massive counterweights. The way they were designed, sometimes you needed 10, 20 kilograms of counterweights. And so that made these mounts quite heavy. Usually you find them under the names of GEM, German Equatorial Mounts, or CEM, C-E-M. They're still available. We will have a look afterwards when we go shopping. But more and more, the customer base shifts to another type of mount. And these are harmonic drives. I'm not an engineer, and this is a little bit too complex to demonstrate with Lego Technic. But if you're interested, I will leave you a link to a video below, very short one, where you can see how the principle is with which they work. The good part about harmonic drives is they almost need no counterweight at all. They have much less backlash than the worm gears, and they're very precise. They're still a bit more expensive than the worm gear mounts, but the prices come more and more down. Now then, there's a third way how mounts can work, and that's the belt drive. And that's how this mount actually works. Again, I think Avalon is the only company who uses these belt drives to make this work. And these belt drives, they have about the same properties as the harmonic drives. They do not require a lot of counterweights. They're extremely precise, and they actually have really no backlash at all. There's one last thing we should discuss, and that's encoders. No matter which of these types you take, the issue is that there's always some mechanical tolerance which makes it impossible for a mount to know where it exactly is. So it knows it by plate solving, it approximately moves to where you tell it to move, but it's not 100% correct. And because of that, with the regular mounts, you need guiding. And guiding we will cover later in this course. But if you do not like guiding, there is a way to buy a mount which has an encoder included. And that's a complex mechanism with very small markings and lasers, which makes it possible that the mount always knows 100% where it is, obviously after an initial plate solving. You do not need guiding. If you leave the telescope standing, you can just go the following night and continue shooting, and it will exactly know where it is. There's only one issue with encoders: they're extremely expensive. And given guiding is a good and much cheaper alternative to keep the telescope on track, it is absolutely not a necessity. But as many things, it's something nice to have. So what should you look out for when you're looking for a mount? First of all, load capacity. Again, you need already to know approximately what scope you have in mind. You know how much weight it is, but it's not just the weight of the scope again. It's also the weight of the camera. You might need a filter wheel. You might need a computer, and so on and so on. So again, you need to know the whole weight which you will put on the mount. And then you know what weight capacity your mount needs to have. And also, if you look at weight capacity, be aware that sometimes they have two weight capacities, one for visual and one for astrophotography, which is lower. Ed Ting once said you should take about 50% of the original weight capacity for astrophotography. So if it says 20 kilos, only put 10 on it. I think This is a little bit outdated. You can definitely go a little bit higher up, but you should definitely not max it out, because then the accuracy suffers again. Second consideration is the weight and the size of the mount. Will you travel with it? Will you have it on your balcony? Or will you actually travel to a dark side all the time? Do you have a back injury, for example, and you cannot lift very heavy? This all might play into what mount you consider. And then it's also the accuracy. And again, the higher the focal length of your scope, the more accurate your mount has to be. And last but not least, it's also again a budget issue. With mounts, it's even worse than with telescope. The price span is huge. You can get a mount for $1,000, you can get a mount for $10,000. And with all that in mind, we will go now to the computer and I will show you around what brands, what models exist. Okay, let's go shopping, and I will use again the homepage of Agena Astro to show you a little bit around. And as you can see, I have chosen equatorial mounts. So the first thing I want to show you is the warm gear mount, which could also be labeled as a budget solution. And usually a good address when we talk about warm gear mounts are Skywatcher mounts. And here you can see, depending on your capacity needs, obviously, for example here an HEQ 5 you get for $1,400. So you also see immediately these heavy counterweights that you need for such a count are very typical. We also have to scroll down and check the capacity that you find here. Payload capacity 30 pounds, so 15 kilograms. And the mount weight for that is 54 pounds. And as you can see, 22 pounds of that are the counterweights. But if someone is on a budget, then these warm gear drives are still a valid option. They're absolutely, you can do very good astrophotography with it. As we always say, everything is about comfort. They're just a little bit heavy, but it's not like it wouldn't be possible. And when we are ready with Skywatcher, you see here coming soon. These are harmonic drives. They're very new. They were just introduced at the NIF and they look actually pretty good. If you look here, for example, at the bigger one, we're here about $2,200. And now you see here the big difference. We have here payload capacity without counterweight of 33 pounds and with counterweight of 55 pounds. But the weight of the mount is only 5.8 kilograms or 12.8 pounds. And that's the huge difference, what I mean. And that's why they are so popular. Pay a little bit more, but it's a completely different game. And I think we have to wait until they come out, the Skywatchers. I cannot give you at the moment any YouTube videos because they have not yet been reviewed, but definitely look out for them because for harmonic drives, they have quite an attractive price. Now with that, let's go to the harmonic drives. And by far the most famous ones are the SIBO AM5, that's the bigger one, and the AM3, which is the smaller one. There's three reasons that they're so popular. First of all, SIBO was the one who really made these harmonic drives popular. They came first out with the AM5 and they really made a splash with it. Second of all, the mounts are relatively cheap. They're even a little tiny bit cheaper than the Skywatcher, which we just have seen right now. And the third reason is that SIBO, given their size and the camera business, they have practically an unlimited marketing budget, which means they were omnipresent. And when you look on YouTube, there's practically no YouTuber who has not done a review. But does that mean now you should go for them? And I don't want to say yes and I don't want to say no. But I just want to caution you, because you see them all over, doesn't mean they are now the primary choice. When you read a little bit through forums, through groups, you see that there's some people who are really happy with them, but there are also quite a substantial group of people who are very unhappy with them, who report of defects, of inaccuracies, of huge backlash, and so on. And I do not want to comment on that, if this is now correct or not, but it's definitely not like that, that just because you see them all over, they are the best choice. With the Skywatchers, let's see when they arrive, let's look at the reviews then, but I feel they might be a very good alternative. And another great alternative, if you want to pay a little bit more, are these Warp Astron warp drives. And I will put also a video to a review of that of Queef the Lazy Geek in the comments, and have a look at that. They use a little bit a very special motor, a servo motor, and they get the better results with that. And I think from a harmonic drive point of view, this is about as good as it gets at the moment. So if you want to go harmonic drive and you want to go with really the best, this might be your option. There is a cheaper one also who has a lower capacity, but especially if you want to go with a harmonic drive with quite a large capacity, that is amazing. You actually see here even the video of Queef included. It has also only a weight of 11.9 pounds, but with counterweights, it can actually carry 30 kilograms, which is massive, and 22 kilograms without counterweight, which means the mount really only has this 12 pounds or 5.4 kilograms. That's all you have to carry with you, plus obviously the tripod, and it can lift then 22 kilograms of gear, and that with a very good accuracy. So if at the moment I would need another mount, that would be it. And then another brand I want to mention is Ioptron. And Ioptron is especially famous because they have the mounts with the encoders. For example, here, this one has an encoder included. As I stated, obviously it gets through that a little bit more expensive, but if an encoder is something you would like, that's definitely also a brand to look out for. For example, here even a harmonic drive mount with high precision encoder. So definitely also a brand to consider. And now last but not least, you might actually wonder, now where is here the mount that I was actually having the whole time beside me? Now Avalon is an Italian company, and in the US you cannot find it on the main sites like a Gina Astra or a High Point Scientific, but they ship. So you would actually have to go on their homepage, Avalon Instruments. I also put a link, and here you can find them, and they ship internationally. Now, sometimes people tell me that they're not millionaires, so they cannot afford it. And I sometimes think it's ironical because everything that's coming from Italy, like the Prima Luce Lab stuff or Avalon, it has the reputation of being extremely expensive. And I think people think more about Ferrari. But if we look at it, this is the mount that I have, the M0 HQ, and it's around 4,000 euros. And they're extremely high quality, no meridian flip, extremely accurate, so I really love it. And so last but not least, when we come to the resources that I will actually provide you this time, it's mostly videos of mount reviews of some of the mounts that I actually just covered. So that when you look around and you're interested in one or the other mount, that you know where you find a full review. So now you already know everything about two of the main parts of an astrophotography rig, the scope and the mount. But wait, there's something very important missing, and that's the camera. And we will look at it in part 4. Until then, clear skies.